Hi, I'm Rod Montag.
I'm Cody Matushik.
And we are the movie reviewers. And today we will be doing a mini review of
Friday the 13th.
Which is what happens to be one of your favorite horror films.
Yes, it's one of my personal favorites. I love Jason Voorhees.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it. When does it come out and what's it about?
Came out in actually 1980. And it is what people call a clone of Halloween. It's also known as a supernatural slasher film.
Okay. What year does the film come out?
1980.
Okay, 1980. This is a time period when you start to get a lot of these horror films are coming out at this point, right? You get the films like Friday the 13th. What else?
Maniac Cop.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yep.
Also Nightmare on Elm Street. So the serial killer became a big rage in the 70s and 80s. Is it fair to say?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay. What makes this one thing is, what makes this unique, and what was the cinematic reaction to it at the time? Okay.
Well, what actually makes this unique is they actually took the time and built up this mythos of Jason Voorhees. And basically, they created this whole legend around him.
Okay.
And the reaction at the time was, this is one of the dumbest ideas I've ever seen in a movie. And that Gene Siskel actually went as far as to spoil the ending of the movie.
Really? Why go that far?
Because he didn't want anyone to see it, because he said it was utter trash and that it was just a clone of Halloween.
Okay. Now, the film when it comes out was a huge mega hit. Is that fair enough to say?
Oh, yes.
Okay. What do you think the appeal was? Because obviously critics were not that strongly behind it. So what made it appealing to the audience itself?
Actually, here's something that you probably are not aware of. A lot of the drive-in theaters, as you know, did double features.
They did.
And the double feature this was featured in was with Halloween.
Okay. Why is that? Why would that be? Let's speculate a little bit. Why would that be?
Well, they're similar movies, and basically, if you're a fan of the Halloween movies, then might as well stick around for the other movie because it's going to be very similar.
Okay, so they kind of played into the clone idea of it.
They did.
Okay, I mean the film itself is unusual in many ways. It has a huge amount of violence, overt sex.
Yes.
As part of it, it's extremely bloody. Now, it was directed by Steve Miner, who had a prolific career in minor films, never really matching the success of this film. At least the box office success, let me put it that way, of this film, okay?
Yeah, just the second Friday the 13th, which he also directed, was close to the financial draw.
Right. I mean, the film, when they were trying to actually cast for it, I mean, one of the things they said they would audition these kids to actually try to find what they felt were the right sort. They would actually look for archetypes.
Yes.
More than anything else when they were looking for these kids. Is that fair enough to say?
It is.
Okay. This was actually what one person said about being involved in the production. I didn't even really think of this movie as a horror film. To me, this was a small independent movie about carefree teenagers who are having a rip-roaring time at a summer camp where they happen to be counselors. They just happen to get killed. This is what Robbie Morgan, who was in it, said. I went to the audition to something else. They said, well, you're not right for this, but we have this movie about called Friday the 13th where you can be an adorable camp counselor. So cheap in terms of its marketing, also in terms of its star power, and really the story. It comes off a bit cheap, okay? And I'm not saying that as a knock, but it was part of this whole slew of cheaper horror films that was coming out at the time, okay? And certainly the work of George Romero had established that you could create a popular genre of horror films that were more overt in their violence and their gore and their themes. Do you think that people went to it for the violence and the gore and the sex, or do you think there was something more to it?
I think there was something more to it.
Okay, what's that?
Because I don't know if you remember the trailers or not, but they were actually showing this mythological being rising up from the lake.
Do. I actually do remember them. Now that you say, I do remember that. They they were famous. Horror films were famous as a cheap trick. It's been around since maybe the 1920s of using backlighting as a way to show or make mysterious or unknown the villain or the monster.
Right.
Okay, and that's done in Friday the 13th as well. Okay.
Yes.
There's a couple other things that we should talk about in terms of this movie. Okay, we talked a little bit about the casting. I want to talk a little bit about the other things about it as well. The music. Okay, how would you describe the music? Okay, the music is done by Manfredini, Henry Manfredini, and how would you describe the music?
It is perfect.
Okay.
The score actually matches what's going on in the movie. You get the tense music when you see something stalking one of the counselors in the woods. You have the horrific, murderous music as one of the counselors meets their demise.
Right. I mean, Paramount, when they put out this movie, didn't want to spend a lot of money.
Not at all.
Okay. They actually did not put out a full album of this movie for this film until 2012. The full tracks were not available until 2012. The film itself, when they wanted to distribute it, actually they only put about $500,000 into the advertising at the time. Okay. However, the film came out to gross over time what would be the equivalent of maybe in 2017, 2018 dollars of equivalent of $178 million.
Yep.
I mean, that should give you some sense of this, guys. I mean, you had a budget of together. You have budget between the advertising and the film itself. I think it's around $1.5 million.
Roughly.
Okay, it's about that time for $1980, but the equivalent today was overflowing with cash. Okay, but people going to see it. Okay, yes, they're going to go see this film, but what makes this film attractive? Why go see this movie?
Honestly, it's the original story.
Okay.
It is all about these camp counselors who start off the film with them sitting around the fire telling this magical urban legend of this kid who got drowned because he was being bullied.
Which happens again and again. You see that in Candyman uses that same framing device.
Sleepaway
okay.
Camp did that also.
Right.
But this was one of the first ones that actually started building this legend of Jason and why the camp counselors should be attentive.
Is the movie a copy of Halloween?
I don't believe it is.
Well, okay, because there were many critics who actually argued very strongly that it was, okay? I mean, you had, for example, Linda Gross argued the film was a youth-geared, silly, boring horror movie. And, and other people, there was one critic actually labeled it as like Hitchcock when compared Halloween to Hitchcock compared to this film. I mean, the film was incredibly negative. A Hollywood Reporter, actually, I'm quoting them actually from the direct review, said it was gruesome and violent with throats being slashed, heads being split apart in realistic detail. Which is the sum total of Friday the 13th, a sick and sickening low-budget feature that is blatant exploitation. I mean, is that an accurate reflection of what the film is?
Yes.
Okay, you're going to have to explain then why this film is of quality, because you love this film, so you have to explain. You're going to have to explain it out to the audience of why this film is of quality.
I believe it is. It has wonderful actual actors in the counselors.
Right.
You have a young Kevin Bacon even.
Okay.
In it, so you see a lot of these up and coming actors and actresses.
All right.
But what I always go back to and why this is actually one of my favorite films is the giant twist.
Right, which we definitely are not going to spoil here, guys, so do not worry about that. The film itself, yes, there was a huge twist at the end, and would you say that the deaths of the various counselors as they're murdered are pedestrian, and also, are they purposeless in the film?
They are not.
Okay, explain. Talk about that.
Because you find out throughout the film that the only counselors being killed are the ones that are smoking weed. They're the ones having...
And that's important, yeah, keep talking. Go ahead.
They're having...
Promiscuous sex.
They're having...
3.
They're having sex with multiple people.
Yes, they have multiple partners, right?
They're ignoring the kids that they were hired to protect.
They're bad at their jobs, certainly. Right. So what is that? So what are we supposed to get from it? What are we as the audience supposed to derive from this?
It is a morality play.
Yes. Because here's the thing, guys. The thing about horror films, particularly American horror, is that they're very much inspired by puritanical religion. Okay? This pursuit of evil that inhabits man. And to beat it out of him. Or destroy the man. And so you have either God is going to do it or the devil is going to do it. And that's what you see in films ranging from Friday the 13th. It's implied in Witch.
Yep.
It should be The Witch and others. So that's something to keep in mind, that there is a strong puritanical element over the film. The film does not inject puritanical tropes directly into the movie, but they are thematically there throughout the film. I say.
Yeah.
The bad people die.
Yes.
The bad people are the ones who are punished. The sinners.
Yes.
Okay? And particularly, the twist is important at the ending because when the killer is revealed of who the killer is, it makes a lot of sense given this idea.
Yes.
Okay? That this would be the ultimate person who would judge you. Now, what would you say are the differences between this type of film and a film, let's say, like Halloween?
Halloween was... I also really enjoy Halloween, but the whole basis of Halloween is this psychopathic child who just liked hurting and maiming people.
Okay.
And with this one...
So what's this one then? Okay, you gotta go farther with that.
This one is actually the polar opposite of this. This is a carefree child who was deformed, who probably was mentally retarded. They don't actually come out and ever say that in any of the Friday the 13th.
This was actually, there's an argument been made later on, because a lot of people come back and say it's a classic, it's a great film, I love it, and then when people try to divine why it is that it has such appeal, one person said, Friday the 13th succeeded because it was brazen enough to steal so many tricks from many brilliant horror films that came before it. And that seems to be a common theme in a lot of reviews, is that it is a composite of some of the best techniques of horror filmmaking from Romero and others, and Wes Craven.
Yes, and it definitely is. You can see it in how it was shot, even.
So you would say it's inspired by, but not an imitation of.
No, it's definitely not an imitation of.
Okay.
Because it took effects from even Psycho and things like that.
Right. Okay. So one of the things to think about this movie, and I haven't really talked about the movie in terms of my views on it that much, because I really want, because Cody's a very big fan of this movie, and I wanted him to lay out kind of the case of why people see it. And that's the next thing, is why do you think people need to see this movie? Or if you do, maybe you don't.
If you're a horror fan, I definitely say you need to see it, because...
Okay, so it's more for horror fans, you'd say.
It's definitely more for horror fans. If you're into the dramas and comedies, this really isn't for you.
All right.
Because it really doesn't build any drama.
Okay. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about... Here's the thing. This is a B movie. Let's be very clear. I mean, this is a B movie. Yeah. It's cheap. It's raunchy. It's a bit trashy. It is. Even its lighting is somewhat only semi-competent. There are some times when the killer is so not... It's not... He's shot from such an angle that it doesn't allow it to be creepy so much as the camera angle, you don't know where the hell he is. So when the actual murder occurs, you have no idea from which direction he came from, how he left. The plot holes of how he comes into one scene and murders somebody, you don't know how he got out. Or how he killed that person from the distance he would have to have killed them. You know, there's one incident where he has to kill them inside the cabin. But you never get any sense of him being in the cabin.
Right.
And it's like, well, what the hell happened? I mean, why didn't you hear him? Why didn't you do anything? I mean, these are old cabins. These are not new cabins. Like, there's so many logic plots in this movie. And when I watch it the first time, they aren't distracting. They are not. I mean,
right.
Because, again, I think it makes use of the monstrous figure that's unstoppable and everywhere that's omnipresent.
Right. It's a supernatural slasher for that reason.
Right, exactly. And so... I think certainly I would say that the film is meant in today's audience, meant for horror fans who are interested in seeing the techniques that were used, from which many, I would argue, better horror films come from. It certainly, I think, reinforces the idea of the unkillable killer too.
Yep.
Okay? The twist of the ending is what elevates this, however, slightly in my mind. The twist of the ending is important because it shows and questions the notion of evil. Is Jason evil? Or is he a product of the evil of others? Is he simply a composite of all the cruelty and evil, and there's redress? Is there a sort of just retribution taken, almost like a devil-like figure, like a wraith-type figure,
right,
that is condemning them to their deaths? I mean, is he a judge, jury, and executioner? And particularly with the twist, that reinforces that question of judgment.
Yes.
So the question is, who is evil in this? Are the evil people the victims, or is the evil people the killer? And that's an open question that we have to ask ourselves, okay? We're made to fear him, but we're made to fear him because we start questioning our own sins.
Right.
Will he come after me next? What did I do? You'll even see this in television shows like 13 Reasons Why, Stranger Things, It. You see these types of questions being raised in those things, in these kind of sub-genre horrors that come around in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, okay? It's certainly an interesting film to watch. It is not one of my personal favorite horror films. I think there are better ones out there. I do see it as a lot of time as a composite of other better filmmakers like Romero in their work. I think if you don't have the twist, the film loses a lot of its zest.
Oh, if it didn't have the twist, then I wouldn't even be talking about this.
Well, and that's a big deal then. I mean, here's the question then, and I'll leave this question to you. I'll kind of leave the last word on this to you then, because you're more of the horror enthusiast than I am. You're much more of a horror enthusiast. If a film kind of lives and dies on its twist, is it a quality horror flick?
I believe it is.
Okay.
Because, honestly, if the twist doesn't work, it's a failed movie.
Okay.
So, because we've both seen horror movies with multiple twists and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes it works, sometimes they don't work, and we just go, I'm never going to watch that movie again.
So does a horror film have to be reliant upon a twist, or just some stories built and hinged upon it, like as a lodestone?
I believe it needs to be as a lodestone.
Okay, for certain, but not for all horror films.
Not for all.
Just for some. Just for some, and this just happens to be another one. We would say is the Sixth Sense, for example.
Yes,
very much that one, right?
Yep.
Or Rosemary's Baby.
Yep.
Where we have some twists there, right? Okay. So therefore, its story hinges upon the twist.
On that, and also because of the mythos that they build with these campfire tales.
So there's a. So would you say? Let me ask you a question. Then, is this a gothic horror? Because gothic horror tends to utilize myth and story, fairy and tale, like grim fairy tale type work.
Yeah, and I'm very torn because in some ways it is a gothic horror, in other ways it is not.
All right. Well, okay. Well, why is that? Explain.
Well, like you said, gothic horror relies on the stories behind them.
Yeah, I mean, gothic. When you have gothic horror, one thing it's an intersection of horror, tragedy, sometimes romance, but oftentimes also failed hope, unrealized expectation. Gothic horror oftentimes deals with people who were trying to achieve a goal that will never be achieved.
Right.
Okay. I mean, it's been around for centuries, as you know, gothic horror.
Right.
And it certainly found its earliest iterations in Europe, and then it came to the United States. I mean, and I wonder if the horror, the serial killer genre of the United States in film was itself kind of a branch or an extension of gothic fiction and gothic horror. Just done in a very American way. And I think about, for example, and I'm just going to give you a couple examples. From the 19th century, for example, if you look at like the work of Vladimir Odovsky in some of his work, you'll see stories about demons of the underworld,
right?
Okay, stuff like that. So there is certainly a question of whether or not those elements are found in these films, like Halloween, like Friday the 13th. The notion of Friday the 13th alone comes back to the the myth and fear and superstition of Friday the 13th, which really dealt with initially the execution of quote unquote heretics.
Yes.
Okay, and so it became a story about bad luck and bad karma, but also about retribution, punishment. That's what Friday the 13th has really always been about: punishment of crimes.
Right.
Under God. And so the question is that what you have here with Friday the 13th? Is this another way to work that sort of history into a story?
I believe it is.
I mean, or were they conscious of it? Maybe we're reading too much into it, which is possible.
I'm really thinking we're reading too much into it.
Which is possible. I mean, because we superstition is odd in the for Americans because we don't have a long history. We've been around less than 300 years, so we don't have a lot of myths and a lot of legends and storytelling of that variety. So we tend to borrow heavily from the European genre.
Right.
Okay. And I wonder. So it does make you wonder to what extent are we borrowing from Puritanism in the American side, but also Gothic horror on the German and French side.
Right.
Okay. All right. So we kind of give you a rundown of the story, some of the elements of it, and so we don't do ratings here, guys. What we do is it's a must-see, should-see, see if you're bored, or God knows, run away screaming into the night, never see it again. So what would you say this movie is?
It is a should-see.
It's a should-see. Okay. And I would say, honestly, and I'm going to be a little bit lower on this, I would say see if you're bored. Because you can kind of be doing the dishes and watching the film and really miss nothing of the plot. So I think you see if you're bored. It's a fun movie to see. I don't think of it as a movie that really is going to be a great fright night. I think there are so much better choices out there for fear. But it's certainly a film that I think is worth watching. But you don't really have to be invested in the story or the characters, I think, to lose the effect of the film, for me, anyway.
Right.
All right. So, anyway, thank you guys very much. That is our review of Friday the 13th. We will be doing in October a number of horror movies, so look out for those. Thank you very much. I'm Rod Montag.
I'm Cody Matushik.
And we are the movie reviewers.